week in Jacksonville. A busy morning on tap, and we're going to talk with Clay County Sheriff Rick Beasler in just a moment. First, though, Jacksonville Sheriff John Rutherford joining us. Thanks for being here.
Good to be with you, kid.
So this week, you stood next to the state prosecutor, special prosecutor in this case, Angela Corey, as she announced that George Zimmerman's arrest was happening, that charges were being filed. What was your role with the office? Because we saw you there at the news conference, but were you part of the investigative team? What was your role?
Well, we've had some very minimal involvement with the state attorney's office, Angela Corey, in the arrest and the investigation, and of course we had all of the security for the event yesterday.
Okay. There was a lot of talk during that whole news conference about all the different ways that investigating has to be done so it's fair, so it's thorough, all those sorts of things. From what you saw, your involvement, is that the process that's happening here?
Yeah, you know, Kent, I had several media outlets reach out to me after Angela Corey was appointed by the governor to that case. And they wanted to know my thoughts on her appointment to it. And I said, you know, if I was a member of the Martin family, I would be comforted by knowing that she was now assigned to this. And if I was a member of the Zimmerman family, I would be comforted because I know this about Angela. Being state attorney is not just a job. It's a calling. It's a ministry for her to justice. And so she is that committed to finding justice. So I told him I'm very confident that she will dig, find the facts of the case, and then she will apply Florida law to those facts, and she will let the chips fall where they need to fall. And without influence from, you know, the media, the community pressures that I'm sure, as we all know, are very strong in this case.
Absolutely. Now, we spoke just a few weeks ago here at the station. This is where we got us started on having you on the show here. I was doing something on meth labs and the abuse, and that's just one corner of that drug world. There are other issues as well, but it's a pretty dangerous job to try and police that, to try and enforce laws surrounding drugs. Tell us how we're doing in Duval County with that issue, drugs.
Well, we're doing well with it, but you know, Kent, we did a murder study back in 2006 where we looked at 6 years worth of murder just in Duval County. Right. And there are 2 pin maps in there that I would have folks go look at our website, JAXSHERIFF.org, and click on the 6-year murder study. And what you'll see is the victims lived all over the county, but most of them died in a pretty concentrated area. And what we saw was they were dying in those high drug trafficking areas.
So an obvious correlation.
An obvious correlation. And I can tell you that at the point of a drug sale is the most dangerous place in our city. And so, in fact, I tell folks it's ground zero for most of the violence in our community. And that's why we are so careful when we go in, for example, as we did just a few weeks ago, to take down a drug house.
Yeah, let's talk about that specifically. I know first week of April, undercover officers put the clamps down on a cocaine dealer.
Right.
6 weeks investigation, but during the process, somebody walks up toward the officers with a gun. Sergeant tells him drop the gun. He doesn't. The sergeant ends up shooting and killing that man. Now, the sergeant, Val Demps, we've talked about this just a little bit. He's used his gun 3 times in his 20-some years career. What does that say about the officer, or does it speak more to the dangers of the specific job? Because he's been involved with narcotics a lot.
Exactly. It speaks more to the dangers that those officers in narcotics face, and that's why I mentioned, you know, that it's ground zero for most of the violent crime in our community. You know, in that situation, we were very fortunate that you know, when we went for the initial takedown at the door with the bad guy who we had to scuffle with, and he actually pulled one officer into the apartment and they fell on the floor, and then another individual came up, the suspect's son. The backup officer grabbed him. They also went to the floor. Now we have 2 officers and 2 suspects wrestling on the floor. Thankfully, Sergeant Demps was there, and as a veteran, he knew that his job was not to get involved in the scuffle. His job was to provide lethal cover for those officers. So he stepped over the melee that was going on in the doorway to cover those officers as they were trying to subdue the suspects. That's when the third suspect approached with gun in hand and an extra magazine in his hand. And when ordered by Sergeant Demps to drop the gun, instead he ran for cover behind a wall, was shot by Officer Demps.
Anything unusual about that, or is that unfortunately pretty common when you're doing a drug bust?
Unfortunately, that's too common.
Yeah.
Too common.
Let me get to this. I don't want to miss this. We were talking about some crime statistics. Basically, the total number of crimes over the last 20 years, from more than 75,000 in 1992 to 41,000 in 2011. We just see the graph there. Why have they gone down so much? And you said this is actually great news over 40 years, right?
It is. Our violent crime is the lowest it's been in 40 years, Kent. And I attribute that really to three things. Number one, we finally had the right number of officers on the street. We needed more police officers. If you remember back during the Matrix study that we had commissioned back in 2005, 2006, that said we needed more officers. We were efficient, we were effective, but we were woefully understaffed. We brought on those officers over the next several years. What we did with those officers was equally important. We went out and engaged the community to get them working with us. In fact, through Operation Safe Streets, we went out and knocked on 77,000 doors, telling people, we're here to help, come partner with us, and they did. Our SHADCO membership, our Sheriff's Advisory Council, that grew from 300 members to now over 600 members, to now over 3,000 members who sit down and work with us every day. And then third and finally, what's responsible for this historic drop in crime is we have aggressive prosecution under Angela Corey.
And that's been happening since 2009.
I think that record from 2009 up to the current date is the reason Governor Scott reached out to Angela for this very difficult case out of Sanford.
We are going to get to talk a bunch more here, so stick around with us, and we're going to visit with you and Sheriff Rick Beasler from Clay. It's been a tough couple of months there in Clay County, so we're going to bring Sheriff Beasler into the conversation in 2 more minutes here on This Week in Jacksonville. Stay with us.